Hey everybody, Todd Bryson here, viral writer and best-selling author on Amazon, here with my good friend, of course, Tim Denning. You hopefully watched lesson one, headlines and subheads. If you haven't watched that yet, we'll definitely have a link available for you. You're going to want to watch that training because Tim and I went all in on that thing. We gave you an hour plus of content that we've learned from what 5, 6 years in the trenches now writing online. And today's lesson is kind of the next step in that. We're talking about getting 10,000 views on a single blog post. And today's topic is images and intros. As before, I'm sure that Tim is going to blow my mind. I'll give insights when I can, but let's get straight into the lesson. So, Tim, how's it going, man? I hope you're well. And what do you have for us today?
Cool. Yeah. So this is another part of my process and also a bit of a favorite thing that I get excited about. And so we're going to talk about images and intros. And anyone that knows me knows I'm a big fan of images. That's something I spend way too much time on. It's not necessary to be as crazy about images as what I am, but I like them. And so what I wanted to start with today is if we look on my screen here, again, back to the point we were trying to make before, if you're trying to get 10,000 views on a post, you've got to understand that all people are going to see is the headline, the subtitle, and the image, right? So if you look on screen, these micro habits gave me 1 hour per day back. That's the headline. You've got a subtitle below it and then an image. So I'm judging your work on those three things. So we've talked about the first two components, but I now want to go into the third part, which is the image. It's the next thing that your reader's going to see. And images are something that I think a lot of writers don't understand. They're great at the writing, but they don't put the same amount of effort into the image. And I personally think it does matter. It's something that people do pay attention to. It does grab their attention. And it's just another little thing that you can use to kind of get them looking in your direction. So finding images is a bit of a minefield. There are many places to look. If you look on my screen, you'll see there is obviously Google Images. So we've got some photos here of Warren Buffett. We've got Unsplash, which has a partnership with Medium. Many people know about Unsplash. We've got Getty Images, which is one that you can buy a license for and get some really interesting images from. We've got another free one here, Pixabay. We've also got Pexels. There are many, many others. I won't go down the rabbit hole of just how many there are. But they're the main places that you can start with anyway if you're a beginner writer, to look for images. And, finding a great image is not the easiest thing in the world. I want to use this Warren Buffett example. So if we were looking for an image of him to complete our article, you'll notice that there are quite a few images here and some of them have been used many, many times. And what I like to do, one little trick that I use, is I scroll really fast and I go, all right, what's the one that's going to grab my attention? Now, when I did this earlier today, there were two that got me. There was this one here, Warren scratching his head. And again, you got one of the wealthiest people ever to be alive scratching his head. It looks a bit strange. And you got this one directly next to it. Warren's eating an ice cream. It's like if you wanted to just...
I love it.
He's a serious investor. He's not the type of guy that takes a photo of him eating an ice cream. So that's just two really quick examples of how you can find an image or how to think about it. And I'm not saying that every image you use should be weird and kind of funny or sarcastic. I know some writers that do that. I also think that can be too much. But it's just something to think about. Again, back to what we were saying in the last lesson, being generic and just doing what everybody else is doing. Everybody that I see is using images like this one here. It's so cheesy. The guy's got this big cheesy grin. It's just this one here as well, like really cheesy. I just think with images that you want to try and stay clear of that wherever possible. And so... I ask myself the question when I'm scrolling, like what makes me stop? So we're here on Unsplash. I'm going to scroll through. What's the image that's going to make me stop? And I'm going to keep going here until I see one. Let's see what grabs me. I'm going to do this live. there is a lot of images. You can see I just keep on scrolling because there's not that many good ones. No, oh, that did make me scroll. See how I went back up? You can see in real time. I scrolled down, went nah, and then I went back up again. That's a classic sign of maybe. And this one was sort of a lady standing on a stool with a blanket coming off her head. I mean, she's got like a really bright orange skirt. So, if I keep scrolling, there was nothing else that did that to me. This one here as well kind of got me a little bit. The guy's got his face covered by his jumper. Just something that grabs the attention. Because think about it, when someone's scrolling through a social media platform like Medium, they're scrolling pretty quick, and the image is one way that you can sort of get them to stop scrolling. And so I always think, what can I do to sort of disrupt their thinking or get them out of their comfort zone? So Todd, I'd love to hear maybe some of your thoughts on images.
Yeah, it's an interesting game because I think that I'm the person that Tim was talking about when he says a lot of writers don't necessarily think about images and they don't necessarily have a process for that, because I could tell you even today sometimes I spend so much time on an article that when I get to the end of it, when I get to that like happy writer place of like, oh yes, I've at last finished this, the last thing in the world I want to do is like find an image to put on the top of that. But I know logically and practically that images, the cliche is true, right? A picture speaks 1,000 words. And so knowing that the image is more important probably than all of the 1,000 words that you have in the post is an important thing to keep in mind. All of those sites that Tim just mentioned, they're good places to start. And I think that that's the way to go about it. Scroll really quickly, see what catches your attention. One little hack that I kind of use is I try to find images that don't necessarily fit the topic right on the money. So Tim's showing you like this cheesy stuff. We're talking about like overused images. When I write writing advice, the easiest thing in the world to do is go, okay, pixels, okay, like search for writing, and then like pick some random photo of like a person at a desk or a laptop. That's the easy way to do it. But usually the easy way is not what gets you attention, and it's not what grows you toward that 10,000 views. So instead, I look for a little angle that I can use as a visual imagery that's more likely to get attention. I recently wrote a post, and I don't know if Tim's got time to pull it up, but it's called a warning letter to all writers. And that's one of those posts that, okay, I get to the end of that, and most people would say, oh, okay, let me go find, a writing person, so that people know, oh, okay, this is for writers. What I did, I wanted to focus in on that warning element. And so I did several searches on this one. I looked for like warning. I looked for red light. I searched for like, I think I spent some time in like scary rooms. And it's about kind of this, again, we talk about, you know how to use your creative energy in the writing itself. Let's go ahead and direct that to an area that's more likely to get you that boost in views. And so when you're searching, that's kind of my process, my concrete tip. When you go in looking, don't look for the most obvious thing. Instead, look at an angle that's represented in your article that's that 1-2% different from everyone else's, and look for pictures around that instead of the basic big topic of it all.
Yeah, Todd, I've just got your article here on screen, and I think this is a great example where, most people would have just gone with a generic sort of writing photo, but this photo here, it's really quite stunning to look at, and it makes me want to read the article, which I think is the sign of a good image. And a couple of thoughts I want to tack off the back was how the image makes you feel something. So, we'll take the Keanu Reeves article here, right? So, not sure why it's loading slow. So Keanu's looking down. He's wearing a very bizarre suit. It says the smarter you become, the less you speak. He's clearly not talking. And so it makes you feel a certain way. You feel very peaceful when you look at this photo. If we look at another one I put recently, the biggest wealth transfer in history is happening right now. And you'll see there's all this money kind of flying through the air of this article. That was done deliberately because, again, I want you to feel like money is transferring from one side of the planet to the other. And I don't know about you, but when I look at this, I straight away think of that. The other couple of hacks that I'll give you that a lot of people don't think, and this is back to what we said in the previous lesson, is don't underestimate yourself and your own genius, right? So this article here, you can see that I used a picture that I took, I didn't take, my girlfriend took, of me standing on a train. And when I put this picture on the article, I thought, it's not a great photo. I don't really like trains, but I thought it is a picture of me, right? And it is me giving advice, so why not? And again, like, don't underestimate all the photos that you've got sitting in your phone that were taken by your partner or other people as a way to personalize your article. So it's not some generic stock image of, people high-fiving that we've seen a million times. So that's another little kind of hack that I use a lot. The other thing that you can do, there's two people I want to show you here. So Nicholas Cole. So what Nicholas does is he said he treats writing as if he's a rapper. And so rappers are really big on having images of themselves. And you'll see here on screen that we've got on the left is a young version of Nick. And on the right is him at 30 years old. And they're very different people. And you can see in every article, he has an image of himself that was taken by a friend. And again, I don't know if I do it on every article because I don't want people to think I'm crazy in love with myself either. But it's something to think about, is a way of personalizing, is just using images. And if you've got a friend that's got a really nice camera, or most phones these days can take pretty good images, they can actually make some of the best images if you're careful about how you do it. Now, there's another way you can do it. There is a guy here on Medium called Darius, and Darius likes to just doodle his own images. And I'll bring up some articles here so you can get an idea. So, he's got developmental toughness, and there's a picture that he's drawn of a number 23 jersey. You've got the 5 pillars of wealth building, and again, he's drawn an image of 5 pillars. They're not amazing images, and there's almost scribbles, but when you see his stuff in the feed, it stands out because it's got these sort of custom images. This one here with a squiggly line and an arrow. That's another kind of easy way to sort of stand out from the crowd, and I really like that strategy. There's a couple of unusual ways to think about how you might use images in your articles.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to remember that you can kind of go one or two ways. We look at someone like Darius, and I think of someone else on the internet whose name is Austin Kleon, and they have this drawing thing. Like, drawing is a part of their brand. So if you're listening to this right now and you know that you're someone who has a little bit of artistic ability, or someone who's drawn things over the years and felt confident in your ability to do so, I think one way of separating yourself from the pack is by go ahead and embracing that talent, right? Because what is this whole conversation about? The first lesson, headlines, subtitles, this lesson, images and intros. And the next lesson, when we talk about curation, the whole game is, how can you be different from 100,000 other people who want to be writers? Right? Like, there's so much content that comes out every day. Thousands of articles. Medium's gone on record. Thousands of articles comes through their curation team that they have to review every single day. Tons and tons of stuff. And so if you have that perspective, you're going, okay, what can I do to set myself apart? The drawings, if you have that, that's definitely something I would lean into. I have a friend, Nate Miller. Good writer, great artist. I wanted him. I was like, man, you need to make custom art for every post. He never did it, but that's a way that he could have stood out, even if his articles weren't necessarily the best thing on the internet. It's about standing out. It's not necessarily always about writing the best thing or writing something better than Malcolm Gladwell or something like that. It's the whole package. It's the whole masterpiece, right? Headline, subhead, image, intro. It's a whole masterpiece. And so, you can go that route. You can brand yourself with the drawings. Another route that I've seen a writer take that branded herself but didn't necessarily have any artistic ability is Chris Gage. Chris Gage is a writer on Medium, and I'm not sure if she's doing it anymore, but when she grew her following, she was using the same type of image every time. So it was like graffiti, street art images every time. And you could tell that she loved this stuff. And eventually, over time, people could connect her to that style of image and that style of photographs. And it helped her decide up front. I have no drawing ability, right? I got none of that. And I have no like specific thing that necessarily like tickles my fancy or makes me want to use it on every article. So I mostly do the Tim route, and I say, okay, what's the best article for, or what's the best image for this article? And I'm not thinking I'm drawing something. I'm not thinking branding. I'm thinking this piece as a whole. How can we add something that's a little special flavor? And so I think when it's images, it's okay. Yeah, if you've got the branding, if you want to do something specific, Nicholas Cole, picture of yourself every time. Darius Farrow, draw something every time. Chris Gage, same kind of image. That's fine. But you can also win this other way over here by going, okay, what can I find that's going to make this really unique and is going to make this stand out? Those are two of the kind of routes to go down.
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation I had the other day with a writer friend of mine, Michael Thompson. He said, we were just chatting about images, and I said, a bad image on an article is like pissing on a Picasso, and he started laughing.
Michael said that?
I know, I said that to Michael.
Yeah, I love it.
And I was giving him an example. I think he changed an image on an article, or someone else, I can't remember exactly who, but an image changed on one of my articles. And I said, it's like, man, you took what I thought was really good. I put blood, sweat, and tears in it, and then you pissed all over it by changing the image to some idiot with a high five.
Yeah.
So that's another way to think about it, right? It's a piece of art, and the image makes up that piece of art. So you want to be strategic in how you do it. But like you said before, you can take the Chris Gage approach. You can use stock images every time. That's fine. But just try and find a subtle angle that people might associate with you. Now, on screen, we've got another guy here, John P. Witz, and he's an illustrator and a writer. And you'll see he's got stunning images. And I don't know about you, but it just makes me want to click the article. And he's got like quotes from the article that he's drawn into the image, which is really clever. And I know for many years that I often get emails of like, how can I help? And I keep saying, I would love to meet more illustrators that are really good, that would love to illustrate some stuff from my articles. So for anyone listening, if there are any good illustrators out there,
right.
I've been searching for them for a long time. So yeah, that's another kind of little hack. So I think, Todd, if we haven't got anything else, we might now switch into introductions, which is the next piece.
Yeah, the only other there are a couple other, I guess, boring items that we need to talk about. So if you're writing on Medium right now and you're not crediting your images, you will get shut down every time. Right? So if you just Google, I don't know, red alligator, because that's the thing that's going to complete your post, and you find a great image and you put it up there and you're looking at your thing and you're like, oh, this is the perfect thing to make this set apart, and you don't add that little image credit in there, Medium's going to shut you down. Your post is going to go nowhere. So keep in mind, you need to have the proper credit, the proper attribution for your images at all time. And then the other boring thing is, get a decent resolution. And most of these sites Tim mentions kind of handled that. I like to, my kind of cutoff is 2,000 pixels wide. If it's 2,000 pixels wide, and again, it'll tell you that in the description, it's going to be enough to hold up. Because the last thing you want, you talk about a Picasso. If your Picasso is fuzzy, like when it's blowing up on people's screen, or if they click into it and it ends up being this little like 300 pixel tiny thing, both of those are just no-nos. And so that's the boring stuff. But, we got to talk about the thing that gets you disqualified. You don't want to get rob your chances of a viral post just because you didn't credit the image. Like that would be a horrendous thing to happen. So I wanted to add those two little bullet points before we move on. But yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, I think the other part just to remember too that you've just reminded me is one of the things that made Medium very famous was the ability to use really big images. So before Medium came along, most images were around 620 in width that sat on blog posts. And Medium came up with this crazy idea that you can literally have as big as you want. You could have a 20 megabyte image. And what they did in the early days is people were going out there with DSLR cameras and taking these gorgeous like landscape shots with their own sort of high definition camera and using that as their image. And if we look on screen here, you'll see Todd's article, The Answer is No. He's got a huge image there, which is part of it creates a certain feeling. And I'm sitting there at the bus stop with Todd wondering what is the answer of no, or what is the answer is no. And yeah, that's something to play around with. You can also mess around with the images in terms of the size. So for certain pieces, I like a small image, but then for other ones, if it's a landscape and I'm trying to take you and make you feel something before you click the article, I'll use a really big image. And you can also play around with having the title and the subtitle at the top before the image or after the image. So there are all kind of things that Medium allows you to do that other platforms don't do. And the images has definitely been part of their success. So I would strongly urge you just to go and check out and see how different sizes of images kind of make you feel. And the other last point that I nearly forgot was having images scattered throughout your piece. So with Medium, you can put images all through your piece. But I want to show you a bad example. And this is me here that's done this.
Nice.
So this is the piece where I have have scattered images, and you'll notice here I used a really big image for the header, and you'll see that the headline and the subtitle is below. So kind of interesting. And then you'll see what I've stuffed up here as we scroll through the article is, okay, so here's an image here. It's a really bad image, and it's a line to the left, and then the text kind of sits around it, and then it sort of cuts off this line here. And then if you keep scrolling, there's another image, and again, it's a bit weird. It doesn't really match the other two. It's in the center. It cuts off the text again. And the reason I wanted to bring this example up is that when people are reading on news sites, they often have images and videos that interrupt the flow of people reading. And when you scatter too many images throughout your article, it almost looks like the images are ads or things that are nothing to do with the actual story that you're trying to tell. So I'm not saying don't have images in your article, but I would just strongly recommend that you think clearly about why you've got it in there. And if anything, I've probably learned over the years that it's probably normally better to have no images in the article because they act as a distraction. And you've got your image there at the front. Do you really need more images scattered through? I used to be crazy and have at least 3 or 4. And now I've learned over the years that, Medium's all about the writing, so you don't necessarily need to have those images. And particularly how you align them, having them aligned to the left as I've got here, it just looks horrible. Like the subheading, the paragraphs, it's just dreadful. So that's a lesson in what not to do with images.
Yeah, it's always a very good thing to use yourself as an example of things not to do. That's the safest way to do that for sure. Guys, everybody watching, the big takeaways I have for this are an image is part of your masterpiece, right? So when someone's scrolling, headline, subhead, image is all they're going to see. The second thing is you got to know where to get your images, and you have to properly credit them. So Tim gave you the big list. Pexels, Unsplash, Nappy.co is one I use. We'll have all of those linked up in the text below this video. But it's easier than you think to find these great images. I love this tactical tip that you gave, which is just to scroll really quickly. I think that's brilliant because you know everyone else is going to be scrolling. Put yourself through the test first. What gets your attention? What makes you stop? And if you stop scrolling and go, what was that? That's a good sign that you might have something. And then make sure you have the 2000 pixels wide minimum as your header image. And so the last thing I want to point out on this homepage is like a lot of times you don't have much control about how much of that image is shown, right? Like sometimes you might get the whole thing if you got a featured article. Sometimes you might be sitting there in the middle of the homepage and you've just got this tiny, tiny piece of your image that it's showing. The reason that's important is when you're scrolling, when you're doing all these other things, have that in mind and know, okay, I want the most interesting thing that I'm showing to be like right in the center of the screen, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well with your images. I wanted to cap that on the end of this discussion. Anything else before we move into intros, Tim?
No, I think that's it, Todd. I've just got the homepage up on the screen here so you can see what Todd's talking about. And yeah, you will see, look at the image sizes. They vary all over the homepage. So something just to take note of. And you'll see there's also one here that's black and white. I would strongly suggest you don't use black and white. It just blends into the background. I think wherever possible, always aim for something that's colored.
For sure. Well, that's images. I think there's a lot of practical stuff there. And so let's move into the first thing that a reader sees once you actually convince them to click on your article. And that is the intro sentence. I think there's a lot of stuff that we can unpack here. So let's move away from the image discussion and into these intros. Tim, what do we need to keep in mind when we're writing our intros?
Yeah, so I think the most important part of an intro for me is the very first sentence. And the first sentence is just another headline. So this is going to take people by surprise a little bit. So I've got an example here on screen of the first sentence of an article that I've written. And yeah, this was something I can't remember again where I got the idea from, but someone said, yeah, the first sentence, just think of it like another headline. Now I've clicked your article. I now need a second headline that's going to convince me to actually read the rest of your story. So on the examples here, you'll see first sentence is, I wake up feeling like a zombie most days. And again, that's a sentence that it's a thought, it's an opinion, and it's something that hopefully a lot of people can relate to, is feeling like a zombie when they wake up. And then we've got another one here. The very first sentence is, writing advice is too complicated. All right, so it's a simple sentence. It's a very bold statement that, you know what, writing advice sucks. It's too hard. And then straight under, it's like, screw that, you know? So we're getting straight into here. We're not giving some long sort of intro that's wishy-washy that has this huge setup. We're getting straight into it. And I'll see if I can find maybe another couple that sort of do that. But yeah, I think people stuff up that first sentence a lot. I think this Joe Rogan one should hopefully have a great one as well. So yeah, this Joe Rogan makes my brain think deeply. Now, this is a great example of Tim's delusional and the readers are not, because you'll notice here, if you're looking on screen, that there's a lot of highlights in this article. That first sentence, nobody has highlighted it. So clearly I'm in my own little world here and nobody thinks that's a good first sentence. So just goes to show that sometimes you can be right. But if I actually look at this article, the first sentence I think originally was going to be, even if you hate macho American heroes, as one spectator put it. So again, it's like the first sentence is telling you that Joe Rogan, a lot of people think he's a macho, but I don't necessarily disagree. So yeah, that first sentence is key. It's almost like, and you'll notice that the examples that we've looked at, they're all about sort of 5 or 6 words. That first sentence is separated from the rest of the intro. Now, it doesn't have to be, but it just really makes it stand out as sort of another headline. And so the way I think of it, if it's a nonfiction piece, it's, you know, your opinion or something that's going to shake people up a little bit. And, you know, if it's a story, ideally that first sentence is going to drop me into that story, right? It's not going to be, once upon a time there was a guy and he was 29 and You know what I mean? Like those sort of intros
Yeah.
that have these huge setups, save that for your Todd, best-selling Amazon book. But if you're not a best-selling author like Todd, then I would try and stay clear of that if you can. Um, Todd, maybe I'll throw to you for a minute. What do you think on the intros?
For sure. I think one of my favorite quotes that I ever heard from a writer named Sean Kernan. Sean kind of grew up on this platform called Quora, and then he moved into Medium, and of course is blowing up there too because he's such a good writer. Um, but he once said, he said, if your fuse is too long, nobody will wait for the cannon to go off. And I just thought that's the perfect analogy because if we're sitting around waiting for you to get to the point, we all have stuff to do. We all have places to go. We all have people to see. And so I think that when it comes to writing intros, again, you want to front load the most interesting stuff. And what you write first in your first draft, I'm a big fan of like at least writing two drafts. What you write first is usually not the most interesting thing, right? Like whenever you take that first lap around, that might not be the sweetest thing you've ever written. And so what I do a lot is again on this review, I'll see what's super interesting and see if I can remove the first draft of my intro. That's almost always my goal in the drafts is, hey, can I make this first paragraph better than it was? And something I think about, like, Tim talked about, it's not a book, it's a Medium article, or it's an article on the internet. You guys who are watching this, I keep saying guys, you all who are watching this, and you are the writers, and you've been through school, and you're used to writing papers or whatever with these grand introductions. The intro kind of has to fit the scope of your whole article. So if I have a 750 word article, I probably don't want my intro to take up more than like 100 words. If I have an article that's taking me 3 minutes to read, or that's taking you 3 minutes to read, and you have to spend more than like 15-20 seconds on the intro, I'm wasting your time. And so, yeah, if I'm writing a book and I want to write, a whole chapter of introduction, that's fine because a book is this big, thick thing that takes you, weeks or a month to get through. But with your online articles, people aren't going to be spending that much time with you. They just want to get to the point right away. One example that I have that's the top of my mind, my most recent viral post is about Donald Trump. And I actually did the thing that Tim's talking about. I started with sort of this story thing. I said, back in 2016, a British entrepreneur asked me what I thought about Donald Trump. And I had a quote, what he said. And then my quote happened to be, hey, you know what? Donald Trump will never be president of the United States. Like I actually said that in 2016 when the guy was running. But it wasn't this huge long story. Like you can write a quick, interesting story and keep that in the intro, but you don't have to be long-winded about it. It was, here's when this happened. Here's what the guy asked me. Here's what that said. And in this case, it was the perfect jumping off point to the rest of the article, which was, hey, you guys thought Donald Trump couldn't get elected then. Everyone's thinking he couldn't get it now. And that intro was the perfect lead into my point of like, it's not over till it's over kind of thing. So that's a little long-winded explanation of, yeah, your intro's got to get to the point. It's not a book, it's an article. Let's get in there and tell us what you have to say.
Yeah, I think the other point I'd add to that, Todd, as well, is a little quote here, which is the editors aren't looking over your shoulder. So when it comes to the headline and the subtitle, you can't get away with that much, particularly if it's a major publication. But once you get into the actual story, that's where you can really start to play around a bit. So often the thing that I want to say in the headline that was maybe a little bit too harsh or over the top, I will make that the first sentence. And so, you're going to have less editing and things removed or reworded in the rest of your article. So use that to your advantage. That's something to just keep in mind. The other thing I would say as well is have some personality. I see too many articles that start with an intro that's just dry and boring, like some Oprah quote that we've seen 1,000 times. It's just something silly. And this is the time where you want to add some personality. I wrote one the other day. I was talking to my girlfriend about something, and I said, I'm in vegetable broth heaven. And it's like, have you ever heard someone say they're in vegetable broth heaven? No, it's a little bit of personality. It shows that I'm, vegetarian. It shows that I like a little bit of food. It's just something extra that shows a little bit of who you are, and that's the purpose. The other part to remember is credibility in the intro, right? So I always have in the back of my mind, why should I listen to you? And I'm saying that to myself. Out of all the people that have written about this topic, and if it's 15 Tony Robbins quotes, why would I want to listen to you? Now, if I'm writing the 15 Tony Robbins quote piece, in the intro, I'm talking about, well, the reason why you want to hear from me is because I actually went to one of his events many years ago. It had a pretty significant change on my life. Some pretty crazy stuff happened at that event. So I'll lead with a bit of a story. Then I'll get into the Tony Robbins quotes. So then it's not just another Tony Robbins piece with a million quotes that you've read before in other articles. And then the other trick I use is I think of the intro a little bit like, for anyone that's done public speaking or attended Toastmasters, there's this thing called an icebreaker. And it's like a 90, what is it? Oh no, it's not a 90-second speech. It's about, I can't remember the exact, but maybe it's 90 seconds where you need to give like a really quick introduction as to who you are. And you've only got a short amount of time, and they've got a stopwatch and they're counting you down. So I think of the intro a little bit like that. Like, what do I need to say really quickly as the stopwatch is sort of ticking to get to the point? Now, what leads off the back of that, a few of you might be sitting there and thinking, oh, but I've got so much to say that I want to put in the intro. And then my advice there would be, yeah, cool. The great thing is when you get to the first paragraph of the actual story or your first subheading, you can continue the intro in that first paragraph. So the idea is that from a visual perspective, it looks like the introduction has ended, in my mind, within sort of 4 to 6 paragraphs is sort of best practice. And then you can just continue the introduction on in the next point. Don't feel like you have to end. You can break the rules. And if you're writing essays, and I'm not the best essay writer, but they are quite popular on Medium, then again, it's going to be a slightly different set of rules. You can get away with a bit of a longer intro. But I think that, one of the issues I see with a lot of stories that I read is just the intro is too long. And it's because the writer is not stupid, but they're just accidentally trying to make everything chronological. So they think if they're going to talk about the 13 ways they changed their life, that they need to start with, this is where I was born, this is where I grew up, then I got to this point in my life, then everything went to crap. You don't really. I don't need to know the backstory necessarily. You can just say my life was screwed and I reached this point and this is what happened on that day when everything changed. Or you can just get straight into it and just talk about this is what changed my life. I don't need to know the backstory. So don't assume like you've got to tell the whole story. Because again, that's getting in your mind thinking that it's all about you and your wonderful life and, your brand and all this sort of stuff. But no, not really. You can just cut out all the backstory. And I do that all the time. So that's another kind of little hack as well that you can use. Anything else you want to add to that, Todd?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a quote again. We must be on quotes today because we've used a few of them back and forth. But there's a copywriting genius. I think it might have been Ray Bradbury who said the hardest thing in the world to do is get people from the first line to the second line. If you can do that, you've got them. And that's a really good framework for writing introductions. I mean, if you can get people into the story, I'm circling around to something Tim said earlier, which is that, oh, well, wait, the intro wasn't the top highlight. It doesn't need to be the top highlight. What it does is it gets people from that first to second line, right? It gets people a chance to come into the rest of the story. I think about writing kind of like spelunking, like in caves. Like these people go diving and they have to squeeze into these little tiny caverns in the side of a mountain. But once they get in there, it opens up and there's this huge world of wonders. So that's my only other thought about intros is, okay, your goal shouldn't be to spell everything out, to tell all the things you've done throughout your years. Your goal should be to get people to move from the first line to the second line, and then from the second line to the third, and the first paragraph to the second paragraph. And then once you're in there, it's like, okay, now we can open this up and tell stories a little bit. I'm looking at an older post from Tim, how to make some money from writing. The first sentence is, I've racked up 6 figures from writing alone this year. And that's, boom, we're in, right? And this is not a post designed to brag, but to be helpful. Now we know that, okay, so what have we done? We've gotten people from the first to second line. We've proved Tim's credibility. And we've also shown that, hey, this is not a post for me. This is a post for you. I think that it can be more difficult to write an intro than it is to write the whole rest of the article. But once you get it, you've got everybody in for life. I think I think it's that important.
Yeah, I'd agree, Todd. I think if you stuff up the intro, the rest of it's not going to be great. I mean, one thing you can do as well that is becoming a bit of a trend is you can also just completely break the rules and just have no intro. So I've seen a few pieces recently, and I've done this, where the first part of the article is just a subheading, and you go straight into the first point. Because not everything needs an explanation or an introduction. If you're saying the 13 ways I changed my life, why not just start with the first way you change your life?
Yeah.
One.
Yeah.
Or the other thing I love is when people do it in reverse. 13, right? And then you count down to number 1.
Yeah,
and you got to remember too, like subheadings and paragraphs, they can be like stories within themselves. You can have stories within your story. So you could just skip the intro, and then just, if you want to tell a story in the introduction, you can just tell it in one of the main points. So I don't think there's any rules with any stuff other than just be creative, keep the reader at the front of your mind, add some credibility so that people know why they should be listening to you. And it may not be because you're the best, but it may just be because you're viewing the whole situation from a different angle. Todd talked before about his thoughts on politics in 2016. He's looking at it from a different angle as opposed to someone who maybe writes about politics every single day. Todd doesn't. So therefore, his angle is very different. He lives in a different part of the country to, the people that support Donald Trump, as an example. So that's an interesting viewpoint. So where do you stand? What's your viewpoint on this particular topic? And share a bit of that in the intro. And credibility doesn't even have to be you. Like, if you're not a 6-figure writer and you're writing about that subject, then you can lead with someone that you know is a 6-figure writer. It doesn't have to be you. And sometimes what I do is, I'll introduce the expert, and I'm not the expert, but I've at least met the expert. So I'll talk about, well, I spoke to the person that, and I did this recently with James Altucher. I've never even actually met James Altucher, but I tried to email James Altucher, and he didn't respond, and he never got back to me, and he didn't accept my pitch. So I've added credibility by adding James in there, but I never actually met him. So, who says you had to have met the expert? You don't. Who says you have to be the expert? You don't. You just have to make the introduction interesting enough that people want to read the rest of the story.
Yep.
So that's everything I've got, Todd, unless there's anything else you want to add.
No, I'm going to add I'm going to recap again, just so everybody gets the big takeaways here. One thing I'm going to link down below is a post that I've written called How to Be More Persuasive in Your Writing. And there's a lot of detail in there that, frankly, we just don't have time to cover today about how to address the credibility issue specifically, and how to write good intros in a way that's going to make people think and change their minds. Because the truth is, your job as a writer is not to write. Your job is to think, and then to make other people think. And intros are a wonderful first step into doing that. The takeaways I've got here are: don't spend too much time on your intro. Get into the point, unless you're writing a book and not an article. Your intro needs to offer some credibility. So who are you to be telling this story, or where are you getting your authority from? The quote that I want to bring up again is, if you can move people from the first line to the second line, you've got them. Intros are that important. And finally, if you have that story to tell, if you have a lot of things you want to say, that's fine. Just put them after the intro, after you get people into what you're trying to do. So that's what I got.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Todd, for joining again today and doing lesson number 2 with us. I hope everyone got value out of that. So we've got the third and final lesson coming up shortly. You'll see that in your inboxes, so look out for that. And we look forward to talking to you all about writing for curation on Medium. So we'll see you then.
Yeah.